Hello, everybody, and welcome, and thank you all very much for coming. My name's Mary Kaldor, and I am the co-director of the Centre for Global Governance, which is actually now called LSE Global Governance. It was called the Centre for the Study of Global Governance, and no doubt Meghnad will explain to you why at a later stage, but it was founded by Meghnad in 1992. And so we thought it was a very good idea on Meghnad's 70th year?
71st year.
71st year, that we should have this event to honour his life and work and all that he did for us at LSE. There are lots of people who couldn't come and wish they could become, and I thought I would start, actually, because it's very nice, by reading to you a message from Nick Stern, who really wanted to become. And he says, there are many very funny Meghnad stories associated with his wonderful quick wit and irreverence and resemblance to Don King. We got that all the time. One of my favourites recently was when he was accused in the press of stabbing Gordon Brown in the back after he had made some typically derogatory remark comparing him with his predecessor. When I asked Meghnad what he thought about such an accusation, he said with outrage, "I didn't stab him in the back, I stabbed him in the front." Of course, Meghnad has given his friends so much intellectual stimulation over the decades and lots of good stories. But of special importance for me is his quite extraordinary humanity and emotional support. In particular, when I was very down after the death of my father 18 years ago, Meghnad walked me to and fro across Waterloo Bridge, helping me to understand the notion of acceptance, and he helped me greatly by relaying how hard it had been for him when he had lost his own father. I did, of course, receive much kindness around that time from many good friends, but Meghnad was special. There is so much to celebrate about this extraordinary friend, human being and academic. I'm very sorry I can't be with you on the 28th and wish you all the very best. Thank you. So we at the Centre have a lot to be grateful for Meghnad, if only because he was a constant fount of new ideas and was constantly stimulating us in new directions. I think the key to understanding Meghnad's quirky politics is to read his book Marxist Revenge, which is on sale outside, which explains to you why Marxism and neoliberalism are actually completely consistent. And that tells you a lot about Meghnad. The other thing to know about Meghnad is that he is the only true globalizer. And that is why it was so important that he founded our centre. Most people think they're for globalisation, but they're only for some bits of globalisation. They're for the free movement of capital, or they're for free trade, or they're for human rights, or something like that. And Meghnad is for all of it. So Meghnad's for free capital movements, free trade, free labour movements, human rights, and of course, internet and communications, all the things we variously mean by globalisation. So in my view, he's the one real supporter of globalisation. Hence, the importance of our centre, which studies the global challenges of our time. Now, we've got 4 wonderful speakers this evening, and they're each going to speak for 10 minutes, and then I think Meghnad will say something, and then we'll open it to the floor for anybody who wants to make a comment, ask a question, and we've got till 8 o'clock. So, and by the way, you can buy at least 2 of Meghnad's books outside. His novel, which I very much enjoyed, and Marx's Revenge, which I've already referred to. So our first speaker is Charles Goodhart. He's a professor here at the LSE. Actually, are you emeritus?
Very much so.
But he's a big figure in finance. He's been the key moving spirit behind the financial markets. And that's been one of the great directions of Meghnad's interest. And now, actually, we've got Danny Quah, who's joined us at the centre. We're able to take that interest back again at the centre, but we were lacking finance. And so it's great that Charles is going to begin.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'd like to think that I've got quite a lot in common with Meghnad, one way or another. We both arrived at LSE at more or less the same time, in 1965-66. And Meghnad has remained here more or less without any gaps, a couple of times on sabbatical ever since. I'm 45 years at LSE. That's a remarkable example of dedication both to scholarship and to this school. He was younger than I was when he arrived, and somehow he's always remained younger than I am. Now, both of us have done much the same sort of thing. We both tried to put the political back into political economy. Though Meghnad has taken that rather further than I have, having gone into direct politics in many forms, which others will talk about more, and of course his various books on Marxism. And again, both of us have interpreted economics very broadly. And while I can't follow Meghnad in going so broadly as to write about Indian films and film stars, at least I have a daughter who works in that same industry. And both of us have founded a research centre. Meghnad did it on his own. Well, I had to rely on the help of a future governor of the Bank of England to set up the Financial Markets Group. And both of us file our unread papers on the floor of our rooms. And we know exactly where these papers are, but everyone else simply finds them sort of untidy heaps over which they fall. But Meghnad is really totally in a class of his own when it comes to his warmth, to his ability to welcome all around him, and to his generosity. In a sense, he is a veritable LSE Buddha. In that respect, I would like to add that he's got a lot in common with Mary's father, Nicky Kaldor, and whom my wife and I came to know very well when we were undergraduates at Cambridge. And as you may recall, Nicky and his Hungarian colleague, Tommy Balog at Oxford, used to be known as Budapest, and which was, of course, entirely appropriate, because Nicky was a Buddha, and went. Now, in the remaining few minutes, I thought I'd just actually like to reflect briefly on a few issues relating to current global governance issues. First of all, the famous economic imbalances. Now, the main problem with economic imbalances is that there's an asymmetry of pressures, in that the deficit countries will always be forced by market and other kinds of pressures to have to adjust and restrict their activities, while it's much more difficult to bring the surplus countries, who are at least as culpable for causing the imbalances, into line, because the surplus countries always tend to believe that they're surplus because they're behaving in a wonderful way and much more efficient than anybody else. Now, under some circumstances, this doesn't matter, but when the deficit countries, as of now, are more or less, sooner or later, absolutely forced to bring about a very considerable restriction with a degree of austerity at some point and in very considerable amounts, we will have a major deflationary pressures around the world unless the surplus countries actually do their stuff. And there's been a considerable reluctance on their part to do that. I think that the recent agreement in Korea and the proposals that Tim Geithner put forward to try and limit the extent to which any surplus country could run a current account surplus was a major step forward, whether or not it can be enforced. The second point I'd like to talk about is the politics of crisis adjustment. In the interwar period, we had a major economic crisis, and the effect of that within Europe was to cause political extremism, both on the right and on the left. One of the very beneficial effects or beneficial developments that has occurred in Europe since then has been that the economic difficulties that have been faced, and some of the difficulties in many countries have been fairly extreme. I was in Latvia very recently, has not brought with it any such equivalent tendency towards political extremism, which I think bodes very well for the development of Europe in the longer term, whatever may be the short-run difficulties that the peripherals may have. But counter to that, there's a worrying degree of developing political extremism and wide-scale differences occurring in the United States, which is going to make it very difficult for them to agree to any coherent and consensual plan for amending their particular problems. So what will happen on that front is difficult to tell, but I think that there are longer-term dangers if the polarization of politics in the United States should remain or continue to the extent that it appears to be at the moment. My final point on this, on some of these global governance issues, reminds me of the old joke about the Soviet military parade. You get first the soldiers and then the tanks, and then the aircraft, and then you get
the missiles.
The missiles, and then finally at the end, there's this little truck with 8 people in it in grey suits. Who are these? Said a bemused onlooker. They're the economists. Well, why are they there? Well, you should see the havoc that they can create. Well, the particular area of havoc that I want to mention in my final comments on global governance is I think one of the worst ideas that got developed in economics over the last 20 years has been that the incentives of management, particularly in banks, should be aligned with those of shareholders. The reason why that's such a disastrous idea, and it has been put into operation, has been that limited liability shareholders have a payoff function that looks just like a call option. And that the returns to a call option are much greater if there's more volatility. So effectively, shareholders actually want and push management to take on more risk. Northern Rock was the darling of the London Stock Exchange about 3 months or 4 months before it finally collapsed. And what I think that we need to move towards is a remuneration structure that takes away the incentives of managers, financial managers, from being aligned with shareholders to being aligned much more broadly with stakeholders in general. There are various ideas for moving in that direction. So I have a fear that I've added, since I have a captive audience, 3 rather quick ideas on global governance in the meantime.
But actually very important ideas and things that we have to think about, alas, because actually they're rather worrying ideas too. Now our next speaker is Purna Sen. Purna was one of Meghnad's PhD students. She wrote about gender issues. She is a research associate still of the LSE. She's been associated with our centre. Now she heads the Human Rights Division, is it called, of the Commonwealth Secretariat?
It is a very good division.
It's a contradiction in terms.
Exactly.
So, Purna, that's great.
All right, thank you, Mary. Meghnad, as you say, has been
here a long time, but a friend of mine and a great support for almost 20 years, when we first knew each other as teacher-student, but on the Masters. And through my PhD, he was a very informal but very important support, though not a formal supervisor. It doesn't matter, it's all right. It's all right. And on the gender issues is absolutely right, because I want to address a bit of that today. And my PhD was on women's resistance to domestic violence, and Meghnad was a massively important person to whom I went with lots of issues and queries, including about... Is it? Yeah? Yeah. About what I was doing. So, given Meghnad is actually a stalwart advocate of better lives and the treatment of women and of women's freedom, I want to draw on that thread tonight in celebration of the man who is not Don King. What I'd like to pay testimony to tonight is a broader set of interest and study that is Meghnad's life and work, and Charles has already made some reference to this. I want to say a little bit about his interest in cultural, artistic life and how it speaks to the interests not only of the social sciences more broadly, but to Meghnad's life and the ways in which I believe he has given his time towards issues and practices of freedom and justice, not only how we think about them, but how we behave. Perhaps not everybody in this room will be terribly familiar with Meghnad's interest in a diversity of issues around social justice. These range from very interesting conversations we've had about state education, to services and time he's given to drug rehabilitation, to those who've been abused, whose rights have been abused. And these have been hugely important in conversations I've been able to have with him to draw different strands together of work. But more recently, in the last, I think about 10 years, Meghnad, you'll correct me no doubt if I'm wrong, Meghnad has written on culture and cultural issues and drawn links to his interests in economics and politics and justice. And in case we have any doubts, let's note the importance and pride he gives to this area of work. In 2004, he published a biography, as you mentioned, Charles, of Indian film star Dilip Kumar, which I believe he described as his greatest achievement. He's written about films, but he and I are on a promise to write about writing too, about which I would like to share something tonight. And it's a taste for Meghnad, who's been waiting, I was going to say patiently, but not so patiently, for me to produce what I've been working on for him. And the author whose work we are exploring is Sharat Chandra Chatterjee, a Bengali author who lived 1876 to 38. He's not likely to be known by very many in this room, so let me quickly say a little bit about him. He was born in a village in West Bengal in a family that struggled for money. Of that he wrote, "My childhood and youth were passed in great poverty. I received almost no education for want of means. From my father I inherited nothing except his restless spirit and his keen interest in literature. The first made me a tramp and sent me out tramping the whole of India quite early, and the second made me a dreamer all my life." I think that's a beautiful description of himself. He lost his wife and his first son of 1 year of age in 1906, and it's reported then that he turned to a very wide range of study, of sociology, of politics, philosophy, health sciences, psychology, and history. A few years later, he turned his hand to painting too. Sharat Chandra's father left his family to work in Bihar, and he himself relocated to work in Burma. He did no literary success in his time, but he was also seen as a troublesome native by the state, which banned one of his books, Bothar Dabi, allegedly for preaching sedition, and then again under the penal code for dramatic performances of this work. Sharat Chandra wrote about 100 years ago, he had a remarkably open, liberal and progressive intent. Let's be honest, his writing, I think, retains a radicalism in much of contemporary Bengali society. He explored the bounds that fettered lives, including the privileged, at the time. He asked for humanity in the understanding of frailty of those who had not succeeded according to dominant norms. He explored the lives of women, shaped by custom, yet challenged by them every day too. Meghnad and I have had conversations about Sharat Chandra's work and have focused particularly on the female characters he portrays and invites us to know. He wrote storylines that showed the narrow-mindedness of contemporary Bengali social norms, sadly norms that still prevail in many ways today. At least one of his works is well known in India and beyond, his best-known novella, Devdas, which has been transferred to the screen many times. I've counted, Meghnad, 12 so far, between 1928 and 2009, but again, there may be more. For those who don't know, Devdas is a sparsely written tale of forbidden and thwarted love, of human frailty, devotion, and strength. Very quickly, Mary, if I can, just quickly say what the plot is. Born into a wealthy landowner's family, Devdas was a troublesome boy who was withdrawn from school and spent much time with Parvati, the daughter of a poorer neighbour. Devdas is, we are told, charming and appealing, yet we see he has a violent temper that he appears unwilling to contain, certainly so in his dealings with his dear childhood friend. That this friend is a girl is significant, that he holds her to account for making him angry enough to beat her is certainly of note. We see early on that Devdas is unwilling to own his behaviour, to take responsibility for his actions. Parvati is slightly younger than Devdas, and at puberty her marriage has to be settled, not uncommon even today. And her family has the temerity to raise with their wealthy and higher status neighbours the possibility of the childhood friends becoming husband and wife. This option is unhesitatingly rejected by Devdas's parents. Nevertheless, she visits him in his room alone at night to propose marriage. Unwilling to cross his parents, frightened to upset them, Devdas wounds Parvati by rejecting her. She then becomes betrothed to a much older man, a widower from a neighbouring village, and Devdas is sent by his parents to Kolkata to study. It's only from there and in a letter that Devdas tells Parvati of his decision and that he never had any special love for her, but he expresses sadness for any pain that she may suffer from his decision. In Kolkata, Devdas continues his bumpy relationship with education and begins a very strong relationship, both with alcohol and with a woman who is a prostitute. He is plagued by thoughts of Parvati, doubts over his decisions, and enjoys massive self-pity. He is rude, he is arrogant with Chandramukhi, who is the prostitute, with whom he spends increasing amounts of time and who falls in love with him. Returning to his village for a visit just before Parvati's marriage, he asks her to accept him back. Here again, Parvati doesn't do what an older man tells her to do. She now rejects him, and again she suffers violence at his hands. Parvati then marries and becomes a loving mother to her stepchildren and a devoted and supporting wife, as well as a woman of great charity. She houses the homeless, gives financial support to the poor to educate their children. Devdas returns to Calcutta, continues his downward spiral of self-destruction, travels the country, and continues to enjoy his self-pity. He inherits considerable wealth when his father dies, and he'd made a promise to see Parvati again. He travels to see her when he's very sick. Doesn't make it, and dies close to her house, but without having seen her. So she doesn't see him again until he's dead. At a mere 50 pages, Devdas is a succinct dissection of frailty, weakness, of the suffocating effect of custom, and of the tenacity, insight, complexity, and courage of women. Sharat Chandra brings us many interesting women, women as wives, women in prostitution, women as independence fighters, as love-struck romantic young women, and as caring and devoted mothers. While accepting the roles given to women, they refuse to accept them as boundaries for who and how they should be. Sharat Chandra recognizes that social roles do not imprison minds, nor do they kill the spirit, and he shows us this most excitingly through his female characters. To be a good girl and then a good wife in Bengal, in rural Bengal 100 years ago, is most easily associated with acquiescence, obedience, and timidity. But his women don't fit that description. And Parvati, too, in this story, does not accept these norms, stealing away to Devdas's room at night to propose, later on rejecting him when her love comes back to her. And Chandramukhi, too, I think offers us some very interesting and humane offerings. She's not an easy stereotype of a fallen woman. She is bold and she is warm. Sharat Chandra draws her neither as a pitiable prostitute nor as a happy hooker, as we now like to use this phrase, some of us. Rather, like many of us, she's trying to survive in a big and busy city as best she can. Like many women, she has found that men crave women's attention and bodies. Like some women, she has made the bargain that sees her trading these for money. We don't know the backstory of her journey. It's not relevant to Sharat Chandra. Chandramukhi's first encounter with Devdas must have been for her both shocking and hurtful. In his arrogance, he rushes to judge and condemn the woman whose company he has sought. Yet Chandra sees something in Devdas that immediately appeals to her and which will hold her attention, dedication, and love for many years beyond their first encounter. I think for many women, this mixture of sweet and sour will be familiar indeed, and it brings a sad but realistic story to the book. That Chandramukhi loves a man who is so immediately and intensely abusive of her is sad but recognizable. She makes herself available to him, to care and to support him through his years of descent. Devdas knows both wealth and privilege.
It wasn't me.
But he's not a sympathetic character. He is violent, overflowing with self-pity, and lives an unfulfilled life. He hurts both the woman he loves and the woman who loves him. I chose to talk about Sharat Chandra tonight and his novel Devdas because I believe they speak to a number of Meghnad's interests. I think the struggle for women's freedom is not new, and Meghnad invites us to take a longer historical view, with which I agree. The fight for women's freedom is complex, and women find their own ways to contest and push the boundaries that so often constrain them. Meghnad invites us to see this contestation through literary as well as academic eyes. There's one other important point I'd like to make about what I consider to be the myopia of experience that is common but doesn't afflict Meghnad. We have had many conversations about experiences, and Meghnad has told me once he felt he never experienced racial discrimination. It's plainly the case that he has personally not known either the myriad forms of humiliation and ill treatment faced by women, or drug-dependent persons, or those who suffer torture, or those who are gay or lesbian, unless he has some very well-kept secrets. That justice is a state of being, a project and an agenda that is bigger than each of us, is no unfamiliar message to Meghnad. Rather, it is part of what his work tells us. I hope that one thing we take from him is affirmation, if not leadership, on the need to understand non-discrimination, respect, and fairness being for everybody, not just the person seeking a better life for themselves. Meghnad's vast range of interests and his various contributions to our thinking and work are very special. When the world that is overpopulated with conventional thinking tells us not to challenge the status quo or ruffle important feathers, Meghnad provides welcome relief and recharging. Thank you, Meghnad, for this, for stepping beyond the confines of any one academic discipline, for the breadth of your vision and for being 70 so that we can celebrate.
Well, thank you, Purna. I think it's really nice to have a story. So thank you for telling us a story. And our next speaker probably needs no introduction. It's Clare Short, who was, in my view, an absolutely great Minister for Development. And development, of course, is also one of Meghnad's key interests, and they've been friends for a very long time. So I'm really pleased to have Clare here today.
Thank you. There's probably people here who've known Meghnad longer than I have, or know his work, his scholarship for longer. But I think we all agree that he's distinctively lovable and admirable for his scholarship and wisdom and his commitment to making the world a better place. That combination of qualities is unusual and very attractive, and that's our Meghnad. There's three things I want to thank him for in particular. The first, when I took over responsibility for international development before the 1997 election, the first thing I studied in any depth was the Human Development Report. And that is a superb piece of analysis and work, and Meghnad made an enormously important contribution to the creation of that. And that was the globalisation of human morality, the seeing of everyone in the world as of equal importance and value of looking at the global economy as one economy with the capacity to include all or not. The famous figure, I don't know what it is now, of the 5 or 6 billionaires that had more wealth than the 40% of the poorest people in the world. I'm sure the figures are probably worse now. There's a few more billionaires and they probably have a bigger proportion. So, Meghnad, that in itself is worth a life's work, and I want to thank you for it. And its resonance goes on working across the world and has helped to shift the world to that inclusive view of everyone being part of the same human family with the same rights. So that's a very fine achievement. The second thing I want to thank you for is Marx's Revenge. I was sent it by the publisher. I was in government then, and I was much engaged with trying to work with Rwanda to help it to recover from the genocide and have some prospects of economic growth. And you remember the kind of wars. There were two invasions of the DRC, then Zaire, and then Zimbabwe entered the war, and Angola entered the war, and I was very worried that everyone was ganging up on Rwanda, who trusted no one. So I thought I'd set off and go and see Dos Santos in Angola and try and form a relationship between Kagame and Dos Santos. And I thought, Marx's Revenge. And I put it in my case, thinking this might amuse Dos Santos. And then, just before I set out, I thought, this is too dangerous. He speaks Portuguese. I haven't read the book yet. He might be upset by it. He might think I'm making a joke about whether he's really a Marxist anymore or not. I will leave it at home. But I read it later myself, and I do recommend it to everyone. The sweep of the scholarship and the understanding of left economic thinking and indeed wider political thinking and some of the blind alleys that it went down, but also the accessibility of the book. It's a fabulous read, Meghnad, and for that, just as a piece of learning and scholarship and summary of all those things that have been learned, I am grateful to you. And then thirdly, far be it from me as a social democratic refugee from the new Labour coup, but I think someone must thank you for your turbulent and honest and thinking contribution to the life of the British Labour Party. And I think you're true to it in a way that many others seem to have forgotten to be. And I think your contribution is long and brave and strong. For example, I think you chaired Chris Smith's constituency for years and brought us Chris when that was a marginal seat, one of the finer contributions to the House of Commons. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for being true to its real values and not getting swept along by recent tides. And the final thing I want to say is that I believe that we're heading for enormously rocky times globally. I see even Mervyn King is still saying the banks are potentially still in trouble and we could have another crisis. I don't know what Charles thinks about that. But certainly when you look at the world and the growth of population, and 90% of the couple of extra billion people that are going to be born before 2040, 2050, will be 90% of them will be born in the poorest countries. The poor of the world are urbanising very fast. I think this is potentially great because urban poor are going to be different to rural poor, just as they were in Europe, and they're going to be more turbulent and political, and the politics of poverty is going to change as they have the power to organise themselves, though indeed also there will be the spread of disease and so on. And on top of that, we have global warming and all the disruption of agriculture and the rest that will come with it, and the other shortages of resources. And I think the global elites' governance of the world is incredibly stupid. No, we can do better than this. Politics is never perfect. There are always problems historically, but the potential of these times, the potential of the communications, the technology, the knowledge, the capital, its movability we have in the world, and yet the mess that's being made of things currently really is quite a worry. And I thank heavens that 70 years and 10 is now quite young. Because we're going to need your wisdom and that sweep of knowledge that you summarise in Marx's Revenge, because I do believe there'll be great fascistic impulses and the rest of us are going to have to gather. And we'll either make the world more equitable and more reasonably governed, or things are going to be very nasty indeed. And I'm glad you're there, Meghnad, so we can go on that journey together. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more, as always, actually. And now we have our final speaker, Amartya Sen. No, Meghnad's the final, but you're a final speaker. He's the semi-final. Amartya Sen, who
I'm the appendix.
Who absolutely needs no introduction. He's one of the world's greatest thinkers. He was a professor here. He's a professor at Harvard. He was Master of Trinity. He's a Nobel Prize winner. And everybody here who's a student studies capabilities, development as freedom, and everything else that Amartya's written. And so it's great to have Amartya here again.
Thank you. Well, I must say it's
And of course, he's Meghnad's old friend.
Ah, good. It is, actually, I was going to mention that, because I've known Meghnad for about 45 years now.
Longer, 47.
47. You see how acute he has remained, despite their age. I'm about 6 years ahead of him, so I keep, from time to time, checking whether we are all right. So when I told Meghnad after arriving in London yesterday, I called him, and Meghnad says, "What brings you here?" So then I reminded him there is a meeting today. So it's good to know that you remember the year. Anyway, I met him in Berkeley at the University of California campus. I came there as a visitor. Meghnad was already established there. And we met and we had a good discussion on politics. His interest was even then similar. After which I thought that he must be working in the government department or something connected with political economy. I asked Meghnad what did he do, and he said he did agricultural economics, which completely floored me because and I have to say that I watched out, and I think in 2004 eventually you did write a book on agriculture. So, you know, between 64 and 2004, a mere 40 years. But the point of importance here is that Meghnad was interested in agricultural economics. He was interested in pretty much anything you can think of. His range of interest was extraordinary. I mean, not many people could have written a book, admiring book about Marx and admiring book about Hayek, and they're both genuinely admiring. Now, I'm slightly skeptical of Meghnad's thesis that there's no difference between neoliberalism and Marxism. But, you know, I take it this is I mean, the main thing to recognize, I mean, one of the two main things to recognize is that Meghnad's purpose in economics, I think there's a grand purpose and there's a smaller purpose. The smaller purpose is to, what he says in describing his book about to Marx's Revenge, that the purpose of this book is to annoy and provoke. Now, and he's admirably successful in that. And that is very much a part of Meghnad. He does not like established conventional beliefs. He wants to shake them. And, you know, often, I mean, the Dilip Kumar thing, I was going to talk about his writing about this film Hero, but since I told Mary I was going to be a gap filler, I was expecting no one would have talked about Dilip Kumar, but of course now it seems that everyone knows about this actor who, until Meghnad wrote a book about him, could not have been the talk of the town in London. So he's that really brings me to the second thing that Meghnad does, namely actually broaden discussion. I mean, even that neoliberal being the same as Marx is at one level provocative, at another level it just broadens the discussion. Have you thought that there might be? And there are some points in it. I remember being struck when I was, many years ago as an undergraduate in Calcutta first, reading Marx's Volume 1 of Capital. Very struck at one stage where he asked the question, this is in 1860s, saying 1870 actually, well, end of 1867, yeah. When you see, and he asked the question, is there anything interesting happening in the world? After some pessimism. And you expect him to talk about the Paris Commune or something like that. None of that. He said the only interesting thing, the only sole interesting thing that's happened, which is in the direction of progress in recent decades, is the American Civil War and the liberation of slaves. Now, to think about a man who thought that wage labor is a kind of wage slavery, it is a remarkable departure. And that, of course, raises the issue that, and that's somewhat in the Meghnad's direction, but it's not quite neoliberal, I think. It's just that the market economy, in Marx's view, was a major, major advance compared with other things. He remained aggrieved about the injustice of the market economy, hence wage slavery come in. So I don't think he really turned neoliberal in any way. And I can't help feeling that Meghnad wants to both provoke and annoy and inform and raise questions. And all these he has done extraordinarily well throughout his life. I was struck by Charles's point that Meghnad went into direct politics. I like the word. So it made me think what indirect politics might be like. And then I'm thinking about it, I thought that Meghnad and I arrive in Berkeley, and suddenly the campus, 64, burst into rebellion. Free speech movement happened. What have we done to foment that? The answer is nothing. I think that probably was the indirect politics. We kept away and watched it, and it certainly, for me, it was a major rethinking experience of my life. I hadn't expected a thing like that in America. It's totally unexpected. And my neighbor in the house in which I had an apartment, we had an apartment, began as extremely conservative. And towards the end of it, I suddenly remember being woken up at 3 o'clock saying, did I have some cash? Because he has to go and bail out some of his students from police custody. So he was an absolute activist. So I think there are a lot of people were in between direct and indirect. Our indirectness consisted mostly of watching things. That's not the role that Meghnad has played. Of course, he went to direct politics, but even as a student agitator and student activist in Calcutta.
Party activist.
Here, well, which I have not been. But in fact, actually, that's not related to its celebration, but I have to say, I have to mention that the Labour Party is one thing I never joined, actually, because when I was an undergraduate, I was a member of the Tory Club, the Liberal Club, and the Socialist Club. And the only reason for it, I thought I was striking a blow for liberty, because I was told, since I was interested in politics, that there was an economic calculation behind. You buy a membership, and then you can go to the meeting free rather than paying a shilling each time, which is quite a lot of money. And the Labour Club asked me whether I might be a member of the Socialist Club. So I said, yes, I was. And he said, well, in that case, you can't join the Labour Club. You have to resign from the Socialist Club. Such was the reach of liberty of Labour Party at that time. So I asked the same question to the Tories and to the Liberals, and the answer was, no, we have no problem. I might say, I claim to have had some role, slight indirect political role, Meghnad I couldn't convert, but when I came in contact with the Tory club, it was the president was a man called Tam Diel. And in breaking down his resistance, I think I wasn't the only person, but many of us played a role. And that may be my lasting claim to have been involved in British politics, especially when he was retiring after having troubled Mrs. Thatcher on the sinking of Belgrano and so on, and retiring as a very rebellious Labour father of the house retirement. But it's the I can't help feeling that Meghnad's views probably would have been similar to mine about Labour Club at that time, because it did seem to be absolutely extraordinary that you're not allowed to join another club if you happen to be a member of that. Meghnad was the other thing that's worth commenting on, I think, is Meghnad's style of commentary. That is, he's always, when he's talking about it, there is a kind of levity about it, which doesn't mean that there isn't a point that he's trying to make. I can quote lots of his funny statements. But he is, in that respect, I thought that he had something in common with one of my other friends, and older than both of us, who are largely dead now, namely Ken Galbraith, who had a knack of saying things which were funny, but which were informative. Sometimes the informative statements could generate skepticism. I remember Ken Galbraith telling me, and then he wrote it in his ambassador's journal about Delhi. He wanted to comment on social life in Delhi. And he said that being an ambassador in Delhi is the closest thing yet invented to the male chastity belt. And I thought it really was a good commentary in Delhi in some way. And I mentioned that to Mary's dad, Nicky. And I said, what did you make of that remark? And Nicky looked at me and he said, oh, old Ken, forever showing off. Which is another aspect of the feature. I think the economics is I think following the missiles that Charles described, economics had a destructive role, but economics also has enlivened the world quite a bit. We don't get everything quite right. I happen to think that this country, where I've been back now for 36 hours or so, is heading completely in the wrong direction. Can't even begin to understand. I mean, sometimes I could figure out that that's what you had in mind, and it went wrong. I can't really begin to really work that out. There have been experiences. Huge debt at the end of the Second World War melted away with growth. Huge debt at the beginning of the 90s melted away with the Clinton years of economic growth. But trying to do something where you not only generate a huge amount of hardship, but actually threaten the one thing that you could get you out of your debt situation quickly, namely economic growth, that seems very difficult to understand. But this is kind of serious economics, and maybe there's some complicated thought behind it, which I haven't examined and which we can. But there is also an issue that economics is raising, as Meghnad has, really extraordinary questions. And then people then come to know of it, and they become a kind of parlance. People talk about it. I remember a time when I went to parties and people would say, what did you think about M3? And I don't have to say M3. And then I was reminded that economists put it into the business. Now it enlivened the conversation because we could discuss these various things. So I think there are many roles that economics plays. Inform, analyze, annoy, provoke, entertain. And the great thing about Meghnad, he's played them all. So I think the moment of my ending this statement by saying how privileged I have been, and that's a serious comment, to know Meghnad for nearly half a century now. He says he is advanced by 2 years. When I first came to London, by the way, when I moved to London, I actually stayed in his apartment. I rented his apartment for a little while. And I think he was trying to re-rent it or do something with it. He eventually sold it. But then there came some estate agents to have a look at that. So they came, and I got it from Meghnad, and Meghnad rang me. He said, you know, the estate agent who had never seen Meghnad, didn't know what Meghnad looked like. Hey, he said, you know, the apartment is very nice and is kept quite well, but it does look as if some immigrants have got in. and if you could get them out, the value of the property will rise tremendously. So I think, and I asked Meghnad, what did he say? And Meghnad said, I thanked him for his advice, and he said he will try. So, Meghnad, you have a lot of admirers around, but there are some around this table. So, congratulations. Actually, Calvert once told me, don't congratulate me when I was congratulating him on a mere 60th birthday. And he said, nothing. You don't have to do anything to get older. That's one thing happens. If you want to congratulate me on my book, then that's different. But when we celebrate Meghnad's 70th year, it's all the books, all the things, all the speeches, and all the ways he's made our life more lively. So we will drink to Meghnad at some stage when there's something to drink.
I think that was exactly what made Meghnad terrific when he was running our centre, that we had a lot of fun, actually. And I'm not sure that we have quite so much fun now. We've got very serious and very professional, but we had lots of fun and lots of discussions and lots of ideas, and that was very exciting. Actually, I think these four have been a wonderful and diverse representation of Meghnad's life and work. So I'm going to just hand it over to Meghnad.
Thank you. Now, you'll have to shut me up.
Yeah, because we'll have a few time for people.
Well, first of all, Mary was saying about Center for the Study of Global Governance. I should maybe say that somewhere in the beginning of 1991, the scientists are very nice people. They're very innocent, and there was a very famous scientist who ran the research laboratory of Imperial Chemicals or something like that, or Glaxo. And he had this idea that the world has many problems, and science can solve all problems. Why can't social science solve problems? So he had a rich friend, and the rich friend said, well, I'm willing to give £2 million to have all the problems of the world solved. And luckily at that time, the LSE director was a chemist by profession, and John Ashworth. So he invited his friends for lunch. And we were there because they wanted to talk to social scientists. So they said, can you solve the world's problems? I said, sure, no problem. So he said, okay, and this had never happened before in my life. They said, we will give you a check of £10,000 to make a proposal of how you aim to set up a research center to solve the world's problems. And £10,000, even then, those days, was a lot of money. And so I said, fine, And so then we made a proposal, which they liked it. But the LSE Academic Board was dead against it. Why was somebody giving Meghnad £2 million? What was going on? How could we possibly accept £2 million from some, some kind of builder, So it is going to be called the Center for Global Governance. But there was a massive resistance. And someone said, we're not going to let Meghnad run the world. So I had to be very emollient and modest and pretend all sorts of things. And I said, okay, we will call it the Center for the Study of Global Governance. And everybody was happy. And we got £2 million. And we got £2 million. And then, of course, the £2 million didn't actually arrive, but that's another story. So I ran the centre until Mary arrived, and kind of, money started pouring in from all sides like a leaky roof. I ran the thing for about 5-6 years, I think on a wing and a prayer. But anyway, that's another, which is why the whole thing was very informal. But thank you very much for organizing all this. I have to thank Harriet, who is here somewhere. If she's here, I have to thank Harriet very much. She's worked very hard on this, and Polly Vizard, and Kishwar, who is not here, my wife, who sends her apologies. This was supposed to be a great surprise to me, which it was until about 3 months ago when various people accosted me in the street and said, "We are very sorry we can't come to your event." What is this? Anyway, so anyway, no, I think it's great to have such friends and so many people here, and Amartya especially. It's quite right. I think it's going to Berkeley. From India, I went to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, got my PhD, and then I went to Berkeley. In those days, I was kind of a number cruncher, a simple number. So that's what I was doing in agricultural economics. I was trying to find out why the price of California milk was higher than the price of Oregon milk. There is an answer to that, but it'll take too long to explain. Anyway, and then this free speech movement broke out. And I had kind of a timid petty bourgeois upbringing in India. That basically you didn't get into trouble, you kept your nose clean, you took exams, and you got into civil service, which by that time avoided getting into civil service. But I was absolutely, thrilled and liberated by the free speech movement, which was being sort of an American event. It was a completely non-ideological. There's no this Trotskyist faction and Maoist faction. None of that. It's kind of, a big liberation thing. And I'm sorry I have to say, I was slightly less than indirect. I stood bail bond for a few people finally, because I was a lecturer at that time and I had some money and they knew me. So. But that meant that if I had asked for a green card, applied for a green card, I would not have got it. And had I got it, I would have been drafted. Because somebody pointed out, I don't know how they know these things, that they have my pictures on the FBI file. I would love to see those pictures. But I have black hair then. So anyway, so I took the path of poverty and came to LSE. Then it has been the most enjoyable world to be here, because this is literally one of the most fantastic places to work, because in a sense it allowed me to do anything whatsoever that I wanted to do. I mean, there are other departments, other sort of, in Cambridge, so you had to kind of declare what your position was on capital theory and on Vietnam, then you could classify it. You were left or you were right or something else. And then you could not change your costume. You had to be. I think Mary's father was one of the few people who escaped all those definitions and kind of, ran rings around everybody. But by and large, you had to declare what you were. And they didn't care. All they wanted was you publish in refereed journals. You could murder, burn houses down, nothing. You publish in refereed journals, that's fine. And the economics department was very much very kind of a liberal place, which didn't actually care about politics. And therefore, I was allowed to be very active in this very old theatre, which was much uglier in those days, but much more exciting. And when the 1968, I was actually an honorary president of the Students' Union of the London School of Economics, having just defeated Peter Osgood, whom some of you may remember as a great Chelsea football player. In a mock election, I defeated Peter Osgood as honorary president. So I ended up chairing the most contentious student union meeting they had, which was to decide whether to occupy the LSE or not. And there I was, all this was, there was overfill in the new theatre, there were 1,400 people voting. And I think the final vote was 698 to 692 or something like that. Seriously. I think the gap was 6 votes. And I conducted the whole meeting, more or less shouted at everybody, kept them under control, as I've done ever since. And then I became more or less the year-long sort of, semi-detached member of the student revolutionary movement at LSE. Semi-detached because what I learned from Berkeley was that no faculty member should ever claim to represent students. That way lies perdition, and hatred. So I always said, no, I don't represent students. They represent themselves. And so, various things happened, and then we had there were some gates on the stairs in LSE to prevent students from going up to the senior common room, where they were allegedly some famous painting, which they were not. But anyway, and the students tore the gates down. All sorts of very exciting things. You guys are very dull, I have to say. And I spent the 68, 69, apart from teaching and doing research and all that, I spent a lot of time in this physical building. Many all-night sit-ins. And I didn't quit even when the crowd was diminished to 20, because I wanted to make quite sure that if the police ever came to LSE, they would have to arrest me as well as the students. And I always knew that that would be a problem. All through, my department didn't give a monkey about what I was doing.
As long as you were
Meghnad is fine, They had their doubts. Not so much about my politics, but why did I do more than just econometrics, which I was supposed to do? They are hard to do. And I kept on doing other things and then other things. And they didn't understand. At one stage, somebody told me, you should actually change your CV and drop a few items, because nobody can believe anybody can do these very different things seriously. He said, they think you're frivolous. Well, I said, tough luck. This is the way I am, and I'm not going to change. But the marvelous thing at LSE was colleagues who were always amazing and fantastic. And you could more, it's like playing in a kind of high-level soccer or rugby game. When you were running with the ball, you knew somebody was out there who could pick the ball up if you threw that. You didn't have to worry about it. We had colleagues who in any other area were just the best. And you knew they were the best, so you didn't have to worry about it. And then the students. I tell you, it's frightening. Teaching at LSE is a frightening experience, because you get up there, and half of them sitting out there think you're an idiot, you're out of date, you haven't read anything lately, why do they have to get up in the morning to come and listen to you, and so you have to kind of struggle to maintain their attention and maintain their respect. So it's very hard work. You really have to go on renewing yourself, learning all the time, and surprising them with new tricks, and teach monetary economics when they think you're teaching econometrics or something like that. You kind of keep them awake. And I think it is the most rewarding experience being at LSE. And then I realized that after the student revolt more or less collapsed in ignominy, that this was a complete waste of time. I had to join a proper political party. And since I could not join a Marxist party, couldn't join a Trotskyist party, because the idea of Marx's revenge was there long ago. Marx is a non-Leninist person. Apart from that, he was pre-Leninist, he was also non-Leninist. So I joined the Labour Party. Many people thought it was a very strange decision. Join actually the Labour Party? It's out of your head. But I joined the Labour Party and did all the various boring things Labour Party people have to do, go to ward meetings and go to management committee meetings and, pass resolutions and, tell Ronald Reagan why he's wrong on something else and send it off to Ronald Reagan so he would shake, in his boots. And the nice thing about the Islington South and Finsbury Labour Party was that it was a complete kind of cross-section of all the troubles the Labour Party had. We had many Trotskyist factions, plus the militants. The headquarters of militants was in Islington South. Everybody's forgotten what militants were, but I won't get into that. And then, of course, Chris Smith being gay, we also had the largest proportion of gay members in any Labour constituency party there was. And the Labour Party headquarters were trying to get us to expel some people. And I took the view that basically if people turned up for Labour Party meetings on a Wednesday evening, their devotion to socialism was sufficient proof. And I wasn't going to expel anybody. I managed 6 years to chair the party without expelling anybody, against the deepest desire of headquarters. And I think then they finally decided to get me out of being chair. So they made me a lord. And that's how you get rewarded for bad behavior. Anyway, so this is and along the way, I think also being at LSE, being in the middle of this intellectual ferment, and I mean, when I was much younger, a teenager in India, when the prospect was the best thing I could aspire to was be a civil servant, I always thought it'd be fun to be paid to read and write. You know, I thought it was the highest luxury. And I think I'm more or less achieved. You know, being an academic is to be paid to read and write, and occasionally speak. But you know, it's a great fun. And the life of ideas is great, provided you kind of venture. So I decided, A, I had to be adventurous, and B, I had to not be someone who made people happy. Whenever I speak, I thought my one aim is to make, after the end of my lecture, people should be troubled and, you know, angry or despondent or troubled or you know, thinking. They shouldn't go away happy, because if they go away happy, then I have failed somewhere. You know, they really ought to be sort of get out there and do something different than what they've been doing, and kind of, or prove me wrong, or you know, things like that. And I think that is also a very good way at LSE, because then your students come back at you, and you have really nice combat, and kind of, you know, and then you know, 15 years later you meet them on a street and you don't recognize them. Say, you told me and such. Why did you change your mind? I told you that. I did tell you that. Then I changed my mind. What can I do? You know. Anyway, so that's. But anyway, the joy of friends and the joy of colleagues is great, and the fact that people turn up and listen to all this chat is a great pleasure for me, great tribute for me. Thank you very much, and maybe when I'm 80, come again.
Actually, that's a wonderful note to end, but we do have 10 minutes in case anybody was dying to say something or to add to what they've heard. I'm looking around. There are a couple of people right at the back,
Mike.
and one down here. So let's just take the two people at the back.
My name is Vijay Tiwari, and I'm from the IS department. I'm a student there, and my question goes to Professor Amartya. I noted that you have interest.
By the post.
I noted from your lecture that you had interest in politics of India. I wonder which political system, for like Indian political system now, is better than before, and what is your message to youth in joining politics?
Okay, and we're just going to take the one over here.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Gaurav. This is a question for Professor Sen. In 2001, it's related to start.
No.
You'll realise the connection. In 2001, Professor Desai wrote an article on you, Professor Sen, trying to summarise your work from the choice of techniques onwards to development of freedom. And I was just wondering, and at the end he said he couldn't find a place to summarise you in. Macroeconomist, micro, Keynesianist, monetarist. And I was wondering, but he did mention the influence of Tagore. And I was wondering, for Professor Desai, what would you think would be the main influence from the 47 years you've known him to have shaped his economic?
Ask more questions to him.
So what Meghnad Desai's guiding influence would be? For you,
Meghnad has influenced me.
Sorry.
No, who do you think was the guiding influence?
Guiding influence on Meghnad.
Yes.
Well, it's a combination of Marx and Hayek and Dilip Kumar. Surely. Yeah. No, actually, that's a very difficult. Meghnad has to answer that question, obviously.
That would be.
I tell you, what the influence is, I had a college which took place in the morning, 7:30 to 11. And I never went home. I stayed in the library. All my 4 undergraduate years and my 2 graduate years, I just spent all afternoons in the library. It's a story of misspent youth. And if you spend all in the library, you don't know who influenced you, because I just picked up any book that was there, especially if I didn't know the author, especially if I didn't understand the subject. I took it off the shelf and I read it.
I might add that this is certainly true. We spent a lot of time in libraries, including the agricultural library, Giannini Library. And I had to inform you that because of the peculiar cataloging system that maybe Berkeley did or maybe the Library of Congress did, among the first book when I went to with Meghnad to find in the Giannini Library is Grapes of Rot. But I think there was a question from there.
About politics, you see,
Yeah.
India.
What politics did you want
Which
to join?
political party?
I don't want to join any political party. I'm hoping someday there would be a political party that would come up which would be representing. But, I've tried to make very simple points. I said, are things moving rightly in direction? There's a one simple point I've been trying to make, is that that the market economy achieves a lot, and it would be very stupid not to recognize that. But there's a huge lot it does not do. So I've been concerned with gender, with education, with healthcare. But at the same time, when I went back to India from after being in Cambridge for 10 years in 1963, the role of the state was, of course, enormously extensive in areas where it couldn't do anything, and extremely limited in areas in which they could. I remember sitting when I went in to say whether I could keep my permission to have the Lloyds Bank account, because in those days, if you came back to India, you have to immediately, within 15 days, stop it. And I was dispatched by some friend to somebody in the Reserve Bank of India, and I thought that he was very nice because I was dispatched by somebody quite good. I think, in fact, a former director of the school here, namely I.J. Patel. So I was treated with respect, and he said, look, you wait here, and I will talk with I had to do a few things, and there was a phone call, and he was dealing with the business of giving permission, and he said that, so you want to go to Canada to see your sister? I could hear only his side of the conversation. So when did you see your sister last? And he said, oh, I see, I saw her last year. Government of India is very keen that sisters should say sisters. But, once in 2 years is about adequate. So I knew the authentic Government of India view on that subject. Now, that did seem to be, you see, it was very difficult because people kept on telling me, so where do you stand, against the market or in favor of it? Well, the fact is that if you're worried that the state is not trying to do those things which it can't do well, and there are lots of things which it could do well, which it neglected and improved a lot, there's no question. Certainly, if I was happy with things getting better and better, I would be pleased. Jerry Cohen used to tell the story about a controller in a university in Moscow who was grumbling, he was claiming that things are getting better and better. And he said, you're complaining, but 2 and 2 makes 5, that's our position. But, we have to compare it. We used to believe 2 and 2 make 7. Now we believe it's 5. Things are definitely getting better. So I think from that point of view, I'm an optimist, and things are getting better. But I would still like it to go some distance. So, the question you have raised is a difficult one. I think there's a lot of ways in which things are moving in the right direction, but a lot more to go. But a very simple point that you don't have to be anti-market to say that the market economy does not manage to do many things at all well. And it's such a simple point. It's amazing that it has taken me 60 years to try to get it across.
So now we're going to have two very last questions.
Addressed preferably to
Yes.
Okay, I'll stand up so that everybody can.
And
Take a mic, darling.
Wow.
Sheila further. Oh, sure.
Don't want to fall. This is a frivolous question to Meghnad.
Yeah.
Does your record of having been sacked 3 times from the Labour front bench in the Lords still stand?
and then a question from John.
Joe, yeah.
Hello, Joe Johnson. Hello, Meghnad, and congratulations. This is actually a question for Professor Amartya Sen. You said you'd come back to Britain for 36 hours or so, and you diagnosed that we're moving rapidly in the wrong direction already. I just wanted to point out that, of course the cuts are very bad, 19% to the unprotected budget.
You don't have to do this for David Cameron.
But 19% cuts to the unprotected budgets, but, of course, partly, we could have done much less than that if we hadn't decided to increase our overseas development budget by 37% over the course of the next 4 years. So what do? Would you rather we didn't increase our aid budget and cut less here?
It's a tiny budget compared to the rest.
Of course, but at the margins
Well,
it makes a
actually,
difference.
Meghnad should have the last word. So can I just answer you quickly?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you give me too much credit in saying in 36 hours I got that. I'm able to read. And I've been following what's happening with a great deal of interest. And, I actually met David Cameron once, and I really got away with it. He was very kind. He invited me to Downing Street. And I came away with a very favorable impression of an intelligent, sympathetic man. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why I'm even more surprised about what's going on. Now, to say that all that cut is because something to do with aid budget. At the margin, how bad can economics be if margin is the only thing you think about? No, I think the fact is that there is a bigger story. There is a bigger story well known in the world, and I don't know why that story is not more fully understood. Deficits are extremely easy to cut when an economy is going very fast. What you have to do is to make sure that you are proceeding forward. But to do something which not only has caused tremendous amount of grief, and I was interested to see my classmates with whom I sometimes disagreed originally in a direction that would be surprising, because Sam Britton, who was a classmate of mine, and who was then an active member of the Labour Party, was asking me to join the Labour Club all the time. And then, of course, he himself moved away from that, and I did explain the issue about intolerance and so on. But when I read Sam Britton describing are these hardships necessary, which is an article in Financial Times, saying things which I could have said, I think Tories have something to worry about, because he's not an unsympathetic person, not a pro-Labour hat who is trying to make that point. There isn't, I think it isn't inhumanity or anything like that, because sometimes very hard things have to be done. But when Churchill is not a favorable character to me, coming from the Empire, in fact, not as bad as some of the things I've seen in recent books, but pretty bad. He did think, for example, that the Indians were the beastliest people in the world next to the Germans, which is a fairly strong league to come out semi-final in. It seems like the Indian position in the Commonwealth Games, coming out number 2 in that. So, but when he was saying, and I'm saying something positive about Churchill now, when he was asking for blood, sweat, and tears, one could see why he was saying that. There was reason for it. There was something to be dealt with, and that was what was needed. Now, I think the idea that we need blood, sweat, and tears every now and then, whether or not it will do anything for us, that's the issue that we're concerned with. So it isn't so much the inhumanity. It is a question of what prudence, what Adam Smith would call prudence, what intelligent analysis are we seeing now? That's the question that's in my mind. And that worries me, and let me assure you, it's not something that's come to me fresh in 36 hours.
Now, Meghnad.
No, right,
Shall
no.
I, before Meghnad,
Sure.
ask if anybody else wants to say anything? Do you want to say something
I just
about
want
the
to
air
say
budget?
that I agree. No, with the aid budget, and by the way, the figures go no rise, no rise, no rise, and then all the rises in 2014. So, and it's what 11 billion, which compared with the health service. I mean, it's good that they held on to that commitment, but really it doesn't explain the rest. But I just want to second Meghnad's proposal that we should all regather for his 80th.
Yes.
Sorry, what?
We should all regather for your 80th.
Exactly. Okay, no, I think Sheila reminds us that I was sacked. I was sacked twice. Three times, whatever it is. But you know, unlike Peter Mandelson, who is a close competitor with me, Peter only got sacked from paid jobs. I got sacked from unpaid jobs, and so I have that complaint to make. I hire me and then sack me, so I have the satisfaction of being sacked from a paid job. Now, I think, Joe, you could do better than that, because there is a hierarchy in defense of what is going on, which I will not get into right now because it will take too long for us. But the nice thing is that in economics we disagree. It would be a very dull subject if all economists say the same thing. And you would have to hire more than one. And then where would London School of Economics be? So, you know, let us enjoy the fact that economics is a querulous subject on which there are a lot of disagreements. And life is fun when you can disagree and fight and annoy and then enjoy. So that is the purpose of life, to annoy and to enjoy. Thank you.